These audio PowerPoints are another resource that you can use while studying for this class. How it works is each slide will have a megaphone. Hover your cursor over that megaphone and right click on it, and then you can click on the play button. Please know that I am only going to hit the high points of the chapters on these audio PowerPoints, so make certain that you read the chapters as well. For anything that is in the chapter but not discussed on these are still subject to a test question. So both anything in the chapter is subject to a test question, and anything that I discuss on these audio PowerPoints are subject to a test question. Please make certain as you are listening to the audio lecture that you are taking your own notes. With that, let's begin. So what exactly is sociology? And many of you may be asking that. Some of you may say it's the study of society, and you're not wrong on that. But sociology is more finite and more specific. It is the study of human behavior and in human groups. And so what you need to know is sociology simply looks at why people behave the way they do in the groups that they do. Now, all these groups of people make up societies, and societies has its own rules and regulations and what not to do and what you can do and what's good, bad, right, or wrong. Sociologists look at this, and we look at different groups and say, why is this group acting like this way, or what is influencing this group to be that way? So the premise of sociology is simply the scientific study of human behavior. Now you might ask yourself, what is the difference between sociology and psychology? Because psychology does study also human behavior. The difference between the two is the nature versus nurture debate. I know that you have heard that. Psychology looks at human behavior from a genetic and mental aspect. So that is going to be your nature. Psychologists are going to say that there is something in our genetics that has made us do this, or there is something that has happened that has altered our mental capacity or our mental thinking, and then that influences our behavior. Sociology looks at more the nurture or the environment. Sociologists say that we behave the way that we do because of outside influences, that we were taught to act the way we do or to behave the way we do, or there was something that happened in our life through our experiences that then influenced us to behave or think or believe the way that we do. So psychology will take the nature side or the biology side. Sociologists will take the nurture or the environmental side. Now, if you are taking introduction to sociology and introduction to psychology at the same time, do not get these two confused. You will literally have to separate your thinking here and make certain that when you're studying for sociology, you're looking more at the outside influences. Now, I want to ask you a question. I want you to think about it. Why are you the way you are? Why do you think the way you think? Why do you value the things that you value? Why do you do the things that you do? I mean, this morning, every one of us probably got up and put clothes on before we went outside. So ask yourself why. Why did I automatically get up and put clothes on before I walked outside? Now, you're probably laughing at this question, but you were socialized to put clothes on. Okay, so everything that we do, we have been first taught to do it, or to think a certain way about something, or to have a specific type of feeling about something, and all of this then influences our behavior. So sociologists will just look at that. It will look at how society changes and how the ideas and the beliefs and the values of society changes over time, and therefore the people within that society change their viewpoints and their behaviors. Sociologists also just looks at the total relationship of people. What are the relationships between certain peoples in society, and then how does that relationship influence the behavior? So again, just to kind of wrap this up, sociology is a scientific study of human behavior in human groups. In sociology, there are 4 sociological approaches. Do not get these approaches mixed up with the sociological perspectives that you will study in just a bit. Sociological approaches are simply a way to approach or to begin looking at something. So I'm going to talk about each one individually here, and you just click on the little microphone next to each one to hear about it. So I'm going to start with seeing the general in the particular. You need to underline, highlight, circle, whatever you want to do, the words general and particular. What this approach means is that we will see a general pattern of behavior for particular groups. Okay? If we're looking at a particular group, then what we see, no matter where this group is located, as long as it's within the same culture, we tend to see a general pattern of behavior. Now, let me make perfectly clear that not every member of the group will do every behavior. Okay? This is just a general pattern of behavior of what we see for members of the group within this. So some members may do certain behaviors and other members may do others, but it doesn't mean that every member does all the behaviors. Let me give you an example. We want to look at the particular group of college students in the United States. Okay, so now what we do is, what is the general pattern of behaviors that we see for college students in the United States? So some general behaviors that we see are skipping class, coming to class late, staying up late, procrastinating, maybe even cheating, plagiarizing, partying, drinking, that sort of thing. So it doesn't matter really in the United States where we're looking or what college, you're going to see this general pattern of behavior for them. Now let's give another example. Another example might be the particular group of athletes. So what are some general patterns of behaviors for athletes? Now, some patterns of behavior can differ depending on the sport, but for the most part, all athletes tend to have a general pattern of behavior. So for athletes, we see that they're very active, they work out a lot, they eat a lot, and they eat a lot of the right proper foods, they dress in certain ways, they even carry themselves in a certain manner. So that's what you would do. You would look at the particular group, which is athletes, and then you would look at the general patterns of behavior. And you do this with any group. So you can come up on your own with different groups, and then what are the behaviors, general behaviors you see within those groups. Now, we would use this as sociologists just to get an idea. If we want to study a particular group, the first thing we're going to do is determine what are the general behaviors within members of this group, so then we can look at and see if there's any irregularities in the behaviors or something that's not normally there. So that is why you would use this approach to begin with if you wanted to study a particular group. The second approach that we're going to look at is seeing the strange and the familiar. And here you want to highlight or circle the words strange or familiar. Now this is going to be the hardest approach for you to get or to understand here at the beginning, but the more that we study, the more you'll make sense of this. What this approach means is that you will start to give up the familiar idea that you are 100% in charge of your ideas, your beliefs, and your thoughts, for the strange notion that they are all taught to you in some form or another. Now, what this means is that your original thoughts, ideas, and beliefs have been taught to you by your parents, by your peers, by somebody, or by experiences. Okay, so when we are born, we do not automatically have ideas and thoughts and beliefs and opinions. We're taught them. Okay, now this does not mean that you cannot change your ideas and views and beliefs as you grow, because you can. So, for example, let's just say that you believe in one certain idea or thought, and this is the way your parents raised you. And then as you got older, you started experiencing something in society, meeting people, or something you went through started teaching you a different way to look at or believe or think about that same thing. Okay? So we are taught all our thoughts and ideas and beliefs. They don't just magically appear in our head out of the blue. They all have an origin somewhere, whether it's some other group of people teaching it to us and passing it down from generation to generation, or our life experiences are teaching us these ideas and thoughts. Something out there. So this means to give up that familiar idea that you're 100% in charge of them for the strange idea that you are taught your ideas, beliefs, values, that sort of thing. The third approach is seeing society in our everyday choices. So circle, highlight, underline the word society and choices. Now, what this means is society dictates to you your choices. Every choice you have, society says that you can make your choice from this box and this box, but you cannot make your choice from that box. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're sitting there going, what? That makes no sense. That's not true. But it really is. Based upon your position in society, and that could be where you stand financially, your age, your profession, your job, every part of our society or who we are allows us certain choices. And some options aren't an option for us. Now, here's what I mean by this. How many of you today will go have steak and lobster for dinner? Okay, now I'm the first one to say I love steak. I can't eat lobster. I'm allergic to it. But someone else at the table can have my lobster. But the point is how many of you can afford to go eat steak and lobster for dinner? Okay, now every once in a while for special occasions we might, but I'm just talking today's an average day and I've decided I want steak and lobster for lunch or for dinner. Okay? Society dictates to you whether you're going to have steak and lobster for dinner based on how much money you have, which is called your socioeconomic status. That will determine if steak is an option for you. If you are fortunate enough to have a lot of money and you don't have to really pinch pennies and worry about a budget, then sure, steak is an option for you. As a matter of fact, for dinner you might have steak or you might have lobster, you might have both. You might go to a restaurant that costs $50 a person. It doesn't matter. If you have a lot of money, you can eat where you want and you can eat whatever you want. But if you are not a person who is blessed to have a lot of money and you're on a budget, society just dictated to you that steak and lobster are not an everyday choice for you. Those might be a very special occasion that you have to save up for. But society says, okay, now, because you have less money, here are your choices. Instead of steak, you might want hamburger. Instead of steak, you might want chopped sirloin, okay, or cube steak. So society just dictated to you your choices for dinner based on your socioeconomic standing, how much money you have. Let me give you another example here. Let's say where you shop. Now, guys, some of you don't shop, and I understand that. But just, where you buy certain items. It may not be clothes, but it could be shoes or whatever you're interested in. If you're a hunter, where you buy your hunting stuff. Okay, we've got this. So society dictates to you what stores you're going to shop in. Now again, most of the time our choices are dictated by how much money we have. If we have a lot of money, then we might be shopping at the more expensive stores. We might be shopping at your Macy's and your Saks Fifth Avenues, and you might be buying those Jordans right off that are, $500, $600 a pair, or for us girls, we might pay $5,000 for a Louis Vuitton purse. Society says if you have a lot of money, you can shop at these stores where the stuff is more expensive. But if you don't have a lot of money, then you know what? You won't be shopping there. You might be shopping at Dillard's on a day of a sale, or you might be shopping at Walmart, or you might be shopping at Target for your clothes, or you might be going to a secondhand store. So society just dictated to you based on your money where you can shop. Now it's just not money. It could be your age and where you shop. Based on what the store carries, your age can determine whether you will go into that store and buy something. It doesn't mean you can't go into the store. It just means, will you go into the store? For example, for us older people, stores like Rue 21 and American Eagle and Lucky Brand tend to be for the younger population, not the older. So I might go into those stores to purchase something for my son, but I'm not going to really look at something for myself. Also, let's just look at if you're in a sporting goods store and what you're looking for in that store, what you can purchase may be dependent upon your age. If you're in a sporting goods store and you're looking for guns or bullets or hunting material, you might have to be 18 and older to purchase something, or you might even have to be 21 years or older to purchase a particular item. So society just dictated to you based on your age where you may or may not shop or what you can or cannot buy. So that's just what this is. So look at it. Look at the choices that you make and say, okay, here are the choices society said I could choose from. Here are the ones that are off the table or aren't an option, and why, based on what. So society dictates to you your everyday choices. The last approach that we're going to look at is sociological marginality. Now let me start by asking you, what is the margin of something? The margin of anything is the edges or the perimeter of it. Okay? So on your piece of paper with your notes, either draw like a square or a box or a circle. Okay, the margin of that is the edges. So the margin of the room you're in are the four walls. The margin of a football field or a basketball court are the lines that are drawn on the outside. So you get the idea. Now, what the sociological marginality approach means is that based upon the groups that you are in, you will be determined whether you are inside the margin or the group you are in is outside of the margin. Okay, now inside the box or the circle that you drew, I want you to write the word normal, but in quotes. Okay, the groups of people that are inside the margin are typically what society sees as normal. Now we can define normal in a vast different ways, but basically it's the people that society says fits in to the way society thinks that things should be. Okay? Now, the people who are inside the margin are going to pretty much experience society on an even keel. They're not always going to be having a hard time or struggling against certain things. Okay, now they will have personal struggles, but it just means that for the most part on every day they fit into society and no one's going to look at them and look at them differently. Now, on the outside of that box or the circle, are groups of people who live and they are not deemed normal by society. Now, does it mean that what they're doing is bad or wrong? Not necessarily. It's just these groups of people are different than what society says is normal. So on the outside of your box or your circle, I want you to think of some groups of people who society sees as different and write them around your box or your circle. Now you can stop at this point and do that so you can see if your examples are the same as what I'm going to come up with. But let me just give you some examples, and there's hundreds of them. Homeless. The homeless would be on the outside of the margin. It is not normal to live on the streets. Although there are an awful lot of homeless people, our society says that normality is you live in an apartment or a house or somewhere in shelter. Let's see, another group that might be on the margin would be the LGBTQ group. Now we see as society is going on that particular group is actually moving in. They're being more accepted. So these groups can be fluid. Okay, but as it stands right now, they're still kind of on the margin. Another group that might be outside of the margin would be your goth or your emos. Okay, another group might be terrorists, radical terrorists. Another group might be drug addicts, prostitutes, strippers, ex-cons, so criminals. These are all different groups that live outside the margin, and so life is rather different for them. So what we do as sociologists is when we determine that we're going to study a particular group, we determine where they fit in marginality. Are they inside the margin or are they outside? And then that gives us an idea of pretty much how they experience life on a day-to-day basis. As with many academic studies, sociology can be divided into two levels, microsociology and macrosociology. Again, micro is small, macro is large. So microsociology will study small, intimate groups, will study small social problems in maybe a small area, where macro sociology is going to study large groups. It's going to look at things on a bigger, larger scale. So, for example, between the two, if we want to look at the behaviors of college freshmen, on the macro sociology side, we might look at all college freshmen in all colleges across the United States. Or we might look at college freshmen in various colleges across the United States, maybe some in California and some in Colorado and some in Illinois and some in South Carolina and some in New York. It's the big picture. We want to see the big picture of what the majority of college freshmen are doing. On a microsociology scale, we want to narrow that down. So maybe we just want to look at the college freshmen at Gordon State College. So again, the difference between the two is micro looks at small groups or small social problems in a small area. Macro sociology looks at the bigger picture. The term sociological imagination was created by the sociologist C. Wright Mills, and he described this thinking as an awareness of the relationship between an individual and the wider society. Basically here, it is the ability to connect personal problems with issues in the larger society around you. Okay? So your sociological imagination allows us an awareness of being able to link what is going on in our lives personally to see if there is something that's causing it in the larger society. Okay? So I'm going to give you two examples here, divorce and unemployment. Now, prior to the 1960s, divorce was a taboo. It was a bad thing, nobody wanted it, and so there were very few divorces. It did not matter how bad the marriage was. Divorce was really off the table because society frowned upon divorce, and especially divorced women. Okay? Don't know why, because the women had to divorce a man or the man had to divorce a woman, so a man was involved. But society really frowned upon divorce in general, and then also a divorced woman tend to have a more like a scarlet letter on them. So prior to the 1960s, because society said divorce was a bad thing, you had a lower rate of divorce. Now, in the 1970s, starting in the 1980s, when women were able to have more career choices and women were be able to go out to work and could afford to take care of themselves and their children, okay, you started then seeing that marriages, if they were rough or bad or wrong, people began to say, you know what? I can afford to get out of this marriage and take care of myself, and I'm just going to get a divorce. So over the years, society's idea about divorce lessened to the point where today divorce is no longer a bad thing. As a matter of fact, we're surprised when a couple is together for so long and they haven't been divorced before. Okay, so society today sees that divorce is no big deal. There's no negative consequences per se to a divorce, and so we see a higher rate of divorce today. Okay, so if we want to look at personal problems when it comes to divorce, we can look at how society looks at divorce. Okay, so I'm about to get a divorce, not really, but for example, I'm about to get a divorce. What are the consequences? What are people going to think about me if I get a divorce? Okay, that will influence sometimes whether you do or don't. Okay, children of divorced parents tend to act out more defiantly than children of parents that are together. And so we see a higher rate of juvenile delinquency, especially in young males. And we can look at that and directly relate it to the fact that parents are divorced. We also see a higher rate of sexual behavior in young girls from parents who are divorced. So we can look at these behaviors and make a direct connection to something larger. Now, the second example that I give you is unemployment. Now, for several years ago, probably about 6 years ago now, my husband got laid off from his job. He had worked 19 years as a manager in a manufacturing plant. And when this plant decided that it was having money problems, it decided to downsize. So it started from the top and was letting go of some of the top management, which one of them was my husband, and of course it let go of the new hires on the bottom. Now, we didn't think much about it at the time because we thought, well, he's got 19 years of experience. He's got a college degree. He'll go out and get another job. What we found was my husband was not getting a job, and it took him almost about 6, 8, maybe 9 months to find a job. What we heard from multiple companies is, we would love to have you. You're exactly what we want to have, but you don't have a degree in engineering. And we looked at each other and we thought, okay, my husband has a double degree. He has a degree in finance and business management. When we graduated college, in order to get into a management position, that is the type of degree you needed to have. But somewhere in the 19 years that my husband was in the workforce, the degree requirement changed from business and finance to engineering. So now we could take the personal issue of my husband not being able to get a job to the social element that the degree requirement was now engineering. So that allowed us at that point to go, okay, do I want to remain in manufacturing? If I do, I now need to go back to college and get a degree in engineering. If I don't want to go back to college, then I need to get out of the manufacturing environment. And that's what my husband chose to do. He left manufacturing and he's now into a recycling company, and they hired him just on the spot. So again, we could take what is going on personally and see if there's a link to something in a larger society. Now, that isn't always the case. When you are having individual issues, those issues could be created by the individual, not by society. For example, if you are an individual who is consistently late to work, or who just doesn't show up for work, and you keep getting fired, that isn't a social thing. That's an individual thing. Okay? If you're an individual who is addicted to drugs or drinking, and you keep showing up to work high or drunk, and you keep losing your job, that isn't a social thing, that's an individual thing. So you do have to be honest with yourself to know and to determine if what you are going through personally is something you create as an individual, or is it linked to something else. Your sociological imagination will help you do that. Link personal problems to larger social issues. So let's take a look at some of the early sociologists as well as some of the contemporary sociologists. The first is Auguste Comte. What we need to know about Auguste Comte is he is a French sociologist who in 1838 recoined the term sociology, and that is where the discipline got its name. Now, one of the things that Comte looked at was he thought that social scientists could use the same scientific methods that are used in natural sciences, such as biology and chemistry, that we could use those same steps of the scientific method to apply to study in society. This using or application of the scientific method to study society was a term called positivism. So again, Auguste Comte, French sociologist, coined the term sociology and positivism and is known as the father of sociology. The next is Harriet Martineau, and we're going to look at her. She is the first woman sociologist in order to translate Auguste Comte's work from French to English. Before this, the realm of sociology was very limited and limited to only those who could read or speak French. So she translated all his work into English. She also studied and wrote on topics such as economics, politics, poverty, and women's rights. She traveled from the UK to the United States specifically to study and look at some of these issues. When we look at Herbert Spencer applied Charles Darwin's concept of evolution to societies. So what he did was say that evolution is the reason societies change or evolve over time. He is saying that societies are like living organisms and they're constantly changing and evolving. Now, he also looked at the concept of survival of the fittest, and he used this to explain why some societies grew and prospered and other societies died out. He also used this to explain why some people were more successful than others within any given society. Emile Durkheim is one of the sociologists that we are going to look at profoundly throughout this whole semester. Now, he is a French sociologist and he focused on social order. One of the things that he profoundly found was his scientific study on suicide and integration. Now, when he looked at suicide, he actually looked at the pattern of suicide and connected it to social integration. Now remember, social integration is the strength of the bond one feels to their society. So integration is how much does an individual feel they are part of society. The stronger the bond, the less chance of committing suicide. So there were 4 types of suicide that Emile Durkheim looked at. Egotistic was a low degree of integration, so the individual did not feel part of society, so they had a higher risk of committing suicide. Altruistic, there was a strong social integration, so the individual felt a very important part of its society, so it had a lower risk of committing suicide. Okay, some of those examples would be for those that feel highly connected to society, might even feel it a duty to commit suicide. So those could be kamikaze pilots in the Japanese culture, or even just our military itself, is that they feel solely connected, highly connected to our society, that they're willing to die for it. The third type of suicide is anomic or anemic. This is when someone feels like their desires are limitless, and so they should be able to have anything they want, and so life is full of a lot of disappointments, and so there's a higher risk to committing suicide, and they also cannot handle lots of disruption within their lives, so that allows for a higher risk of suicide as well. And then the fatalistic type of suicide is a person whose belief is that life is only getting worse and that there is no other choice and that the best choice is to commit suicide. So this is Durkheim in his 4 types of suicide. Now let's look at Max Weber. Now, the American version of this is the last name is Weber, but it is actually pronounced in its German origin Weber, as if spelled V-A-B-E-R. So from here on out, when you refer to this sociologist, I want you to say Max Weber. Now, Weber is a German sociologist who had a profound impact on sociology. And one of these impacts is the understanding of human behavior in society. The word that he used is a German word, Verstehen, and that literally means understanding. And so Weber said, in order to understand behavior, we must first understand the thoughts and feelings that an individual or group has about a specific element or a specific situation. So I want you to write down on your piece of paper this equation. Write the word thoughts, then the plus sign, then the word feelings, then the equal sign, and then the word behavior. So your equation should say thoughts plus feelings equals behavior. Now what Weber is saying here is that in order to understand a human behavior, we must first go back to the original thoughts that this individual was taught about this specific thing that is going on that they are behaving towards or how they are interacting towards it. So with every thought, we are taught a particular feeling that is attached to that. Now, the thought itself is going to be good, bad, right, wrong, positive, or negative. The feeling attached to it then is going to be a coincidental feeling with it, and then that leads to a behavior. So, for example, Brussels sprouts. Okay? It depends on how you feel about Brussels sprouts here. Now, I personally do not like Brussels sprouts. So, I have Brussels sprouts. I have a thought, Brussels sprouts are yucky. So, my feeling is, negative. And so, my behavior towards Brussels sprouts is, I'm not going to eat them. Now, it could be the opposite. If someone loves Brussels sprouts, the thought towards Brussels sprouts is these are good and they're delicious. And then the feeling is a positive, and so they're going to eat them. So, again, in order to understand someone's behavior and or to change a behavior, we must first go back and understand the thoughts and feelings attached to it. This is used in rehabilitation, in rehab, and in therapy. If someone is a drug addict, then we can't just tell them stop using meth or quit using cocaine. Okay? You can't just tell them that and then expect the behavior to change. You must first go back to their thoughts about that specific drug and the feelings attached to that specific drug. Okay? If you understand that an addict of anything, whether it be drugs, alcohol, gambling, pornography, whatever it may be, they have a specific thought and feeling attached to that addiction. And that dictates then the behavior. So first to understand the behavior and to change it, you must first go back to the original thoughts. Now, enough about Max Weber. Let's look at Karl Marx. Now, Karl Marx is not a sociologist, actually. He is a German economist. However, he made significant impacts on sociology when it comes to social class. Now, he looked at the economic factors that influence social life, and his belief was that the upper class, which were called the bourgeoisie, controlled all the money, controlled all the businesses, controlled all the capital, and he thought that that was wrong because they were becoming richer off the backs of the workers or the laborers who were called the proletariats. Now, Marx hated capitalism, and he wanted the proletariats, he wanted the workers to revolt up against the owners and then bring in socialism. Now, we will later in the semester talk about capitalism and socialism and the differences between the two. However, Marx at the time thought that socialism would be better, that everybody would be equal, everybody would put in what they could put in, and then everybody's needs would be met. What he didn't realize is that socialism would eventually lead to capitalism. So Karl Marx is actually known as the founder of capitalism. The last sociologist I want you to know is W.E.B. Du Bois. Now, he is one of my most absolute favorite sociologist, and I spent about 2 semesters studying him. He was born in 1868 to parents who were slaves. So he was born right after the end of the Civil War. So imagine that time period. He was the first African American in the United States to obtain a PhD, and he was the co-founder of the NAACP. Now, one of the things that he studied was what is known as double consciousness. Now, the term refers to the division of an individual's identity into 2 or more realities. And mainly what he was talking about is what was it like to be a black person in a time in which everything in society was geared towards a white person. And so how does an individual maintain their blackness, what it is to be black, but also be in a world that was for whites? Now, W.E.B. Du Bois actually believed that eventually the color lines would disappear between races. And so we would have what is known as a biracial person, then a triracial person, and then a quadracial person. And eventually race just would go away because we're all a mix of different races. Now, what that means, of course, is a biracial, we know, let's just say a white person and a black person marry and they have a child. That child is biracial. Now, that child then grows up and let's say marries a Hispanic person. They have children. Their children are triracial. They are now white, black, and Hispanic. Now, that triracial child grows up and marries an Asian, and then they have a child. Their child is quadracial. And you can see how it goes and how W.E.B. Du Bois predicted that eventually the color lines would just disappear. And he is actually true today. So these are the sociologists, and you need to study these. 7 for this point. We will talk about each one of these off and on throughout the semester. Let's take a look at sociology's theoretical perspectives. Now, in sociology, there are 3 perspectives. Now, another word for perspective is a viewpoint, a way of seeing something. And in sociology, we have 3. The functionalist perspective, the conflict perspective, and the interactionist perspective. Now, you may also hear them referred to as social functionalist perspective, social conflict perspective, and symbolic interactionist perspective. That is how they were referred to earlier in sociology, but now it's been shortened to functionalist, conflict, and interactionist. Just didn't want you to be confused if you saw it referred to as another name. We're going to look at these 3, and these are the basis of everything that we are going to study for the rest of the semester. Now, a sociologist can use any of these perspectives when we are studying something in society. However, one of these perspectives will probably sit more profoundly with the way you personally see society more than the others. For example, I am very much a functionalist perspective sociologist, where most sociologists are conflict perspective sociologists. I just view society more through the functionalist perspective than I do anything else. However, with different studies throughout my career, I have used the different types of perspectives. For example, in studying gang members and interaction amongst gang members, I used the interactionist perspective, okay? But then when I was studying male prisoners on death row and life within prison, I actually use the conflict perspective. So again, depending on what you are studying or what you are looking at, you can apply any of these perspectives. So as we're studying, there's going to be one of them that you're probably like, that is how I see things, and you're going to gravitate towards it more than any of the others. However, don't forget, it's just important to know about the other two as well. So let's get looking at these perspectives. The first perspective that we're going to look at is the functionalist perspective. Now, as a functionalist, we look at society as a living organism, that it is something that is living and breathing and growing and changing. Now, the functionalist perspective simply looks at society as parts that are structured to maintain a stability. A functionalist perspective looks at society that is made up of different parts called structures. Each part has a job to do, and when each of those parts are working correctly, then society runs smoothly. Okay, now you might want to look at this as far as, for example, the body. Okay, the body as a whole is society. Then the body is made up of different parts. So think about the different organs in the body, the different types of systems, the respiratory system, the blood system, the nervous system. Each part of the body has a job to do. And as long as each part is functioning correctly, then the body as a whole functions smoothly. That's how functionalists see society. Okay? Now, different parts of society, again, are called structures, and those are the different types of systems that we have. So it could be the education system, the religious system, the economic system, the political system. We could look at the family structure as part of a society. It can even go down to something such as our roadway system or our traffic light system. Each system has a job to perform, and as long as each one is performing correctly, then society runs smoothly. Now, these functions, there are three terms when it comes to functions: manifest function, latent function, and a dysfunction. Now, the manifest function of something is the obvious or the most open function of that thing. It's when you hear this, the first thing that comes to mind is, oh, that's supposed to do this. For example, what is the manifest function for the education system? Okay, what's the job of the education system? And everyone will probably say to teach. It's to teach us what we need to know so that we can graduate and get a degree. That's the manifest function. What is the manifest function of the criminal justice system? That is to punish criminals. What is the manifest function of our police force? That is to catch the criminals or to protect the citizens. Okay? What is the manifest function of the religious system? That's to teach morals and ideas and values. So your manifest function is the obvious job. Now, the latent function is also a job that part or that structure may perform, but it may not be so obvious. You may not even realize that it's doing it. A latent function of the college education system is to stimulate the economy. Okay, now you're sitting here going, okay, now the manifest function of college is to teach us what we need to know so we can get a degree, so we can get the job we want. But how in the world does the college system stimulate economy? Okay, so let me ask you this. How many of you decided to go to college because you wanted to stimulate the economy? Well, most of us are going to go, what? Okay, here's what happens. When you go to college and you didn't get the degree you want, you have a better chance of getting the job that you want, which pays more money. The more money you have, the more money you spend, thus you're stimulating the economy. So the college system, by teaching you what you needed to know so you can get that job and make lots of money, is actually part of the job is to stimulate the economy. Okay, a dysfunction then refers to any element or process that society disrupts the social system, that it causes something in society to not work correctly. Okay, so for example, the manifest function of our traffic light system is to allow traffic to run smoothly and to prevent accidents. All right, if everybody's paying attention to the lights, when your light is red, you're going to stop, and the other side's light is green, so they're going to go, so you're not going to smack into each other. However, what happens when you come up to a light and it's blinking or it's not working? That's a dysfunction. Okay, and people a lot of times don't pay attention, and it might be yellow, but it's blinking. All we know is when we see yellow, we typically speed up to get through it, but it's not registering to us that that is blinking, which means that the traffic light system isn't working correctly, and then we might run it, and so might someone else, and it causes an accident. So that is a dysfunction. So know the basic premise of functionalists, how they view society, and know the difference between the three types of functions. Now, the conflict perspective looks at society in terms of tension between groups or groups of people. Basically, how it sees society is nothing more than groups of people in conflict or fighting with each other over some sort of resource. Now, that could be power or prestige or money or housing or access to something, that sort of thing. A conflict perspective simply sees everything in different groups. One group is going to be advantaged in the opinion of the sociologist, and one group is going to be disadvantaged. Okay? And they're always fighting over some type of resource. So for example, they might look at males versus female. Okay, and they're going to see that the group of males is more dominant or advantaged over females. And then they might see that they are in conflict over things such as getting paid the same, or having the same amount of opportunities for promotions at work, or being hired the same. So that's one example. A conflict theorist might look at different groups based on race or ethnicity and see how they are conflicting with each other over certain things. Or they might look at different religious groups. Just basically the premise of the conflict perspective is tension between groups that are in conflict with each other over a certain resource. The interactionist perspective is going to be a micro level of sociology, and what they do is they look at everyday forms of interaction between people in order to explain society. Okay? Now, the interactionist perspective actually looks at small groups. Okay? They want to look at the interaction between people in small groups. How do they interact with each other? And then how does that group interact with other groups in society as a whole? Okay, now here you're going to look at things such as symbols and meanings within the groups and how those things may influence their behavior. But for example, an interactionist might look at a family unit. And what they might want to look at is what is the interactions between the parents themselves. Or what is the interaction between the parents and the children based on birth rate? So how does the parents interact with the oldest child compared to how does the parents interact with the youngest child? Or an interactionist might look at the interaction between the siblings themselves. Are they boys and girls? Does that make a difference in the interaction? Does it make a difference who's older or who's younger? How does the oldest act towards the middle or the middle towards the youngest? That's all that interactionists look at, is everyday interactions between groups of people in order to explain behavior on society as a whole. Now, within the interactionist, you have a sociologist called Erving Goffman, okay? And he actually made popular a term called dramaturgical approach. And basically, what Goffman was saying is that all people in society are like theatrical actors on a stage, and that at any point we are acting out parts, okay? Society or the public is the theater or the stage, and depending on where we are taking on a part or a role, and we are playing or behaving in a manner that is appropriate for that particular part. And so for right now, that's what you need to know, is that the dramaturgical approach basically states that we as all people are theatrical performers, in that we will change our behavior and the impressions that we give off based upon where we are at and who is around us. As in the natural sciences, such as biology and chemistry, sociology can follow the scientific method, the same 6 steps that we do in science, and we can apply those steps to when we are studying a social phenomena. Now, those 6 steps are: ask a question, research existing sources, formulate a hypothesis, design and conduct a study, draw conclusions, and then report your results. So I'm going to briefly give you an overview of each. However, make certain in the textbook that you read in details regarding each of these steps and the terms that are applied to it. Now, the first step of the scientific method, when you are looking at something in society, is to either ask a question about something that's going on, describe a problem, or just identify a specific area of interest. The topic should be narrow enough that you can study it, yet vague enough that, it allows for some openness of what we might find. So for example, let's just say that we see a lot of college freshmen, or even just college students, partying and drinking. Now, we do see more college freshmen and sophomores doing it more so than seniors. So the question may be, why is it that more college freshmen tend to party and drink compared to upperclassmen? So there you've asked a question. The next step then is to research any existing sources and any other research that's already out there on the topic. So you're just going to look and do a literature review of what's already out there. Based off of what you have found in the research or what you have seen, you're going to formulate a hypothesis. Now, a hypothesis is just an assumption about how 2 or more variables are related. It's a hypothesis of why whatever is occurring is occurring. So you're going to formulate that. This is the question I'm asking, or this is the behavior that I want to research and why it's happening. Now, my hypothesis is, okay, here's my educated guess of why it is happening. Based off of that, you are then going to design and conduct a study. Now, there are different ways in which you can design and conduct a study, and that is using surveys, doing interviews. You could do field research, which means you're out in the field, you're out actually collecting data. You could do experiments, participant observation, the different types of studies. Then you're going to conduct those studies. So you're going to gather your information, you're going to gather your data up through this study. The next step then is, based on the data, you're going to look at that data, you're going to narrow it down, you're going to see what that data tells you, and based on the data, you're going to draw a conclusion. Okay? And this conclusion, based on the data, will either support your hypothesis or it's going to prove your hypothesis wrong. Now, ethically, whatever the data shows is what you need to report. And so, again, this is an ethics situation here where researchers might be tempted, if the data disproves their hypothesis, that they might be tempted to tweak the data, or they might be tempted to change the study in some way or another so that the data supports the hypothesis. So as a sociologist, you are going to have to understand and be ethical enough that the data is what the data is. And for example, I did a study and conducted research for about 4 to 6 months, and all the data disproved my hypothesis, and I just had to accept it. So then my paper became about why it disproved it and the findings that I had found during the study. Now, the last step to the scientific method, of course, is to report your results. It's to report it to whomever, the audience is in which you are doing the research for. So again, these 6 steps to the scientific method are used when we are studying social phenomena. Sociologists are guided by a certain code of ethics. This was established by the American Sociological Association in 1997, and these are the ethics or the principles that all sociologists follow when we are doing research. Okay, they're pretty much clear cut. I'll just go over them individually. Number 1, maintain objectivity and integrity. That means be objective. Leave out your personal thoughts, leave out your personal feelings. That means your research needs to be unbiased. And this can be very, very hard to do. You have to be very aware and be able to catch yourself when you are inserting your biases or your own personal thoughts into it. You have to go by the research, you have to go by the data, and you have to acknowledge that that is what it is, whether you agree with it or not. The second is respect the subject's right to privacy and dignity, which means that we do not share information about our subjects with anyone. We do not talk about what is occurred within our research with other people outside of the study, that we just have, we must protect the rights of privacy. Number 3, protect subjects from personal harm. You can also add on to this not only personal harm, but intellectual harm and emotional harm. But basically what it is whatever we are doing, we cannot bring harm to our participants. Okay? Number 4 is preserve confidentiality, which means you cannot discuss anything about the research. You cannot discuss anything about the people involved in the research with anyone outside of the group. 5, you must seek informed consent. So for everything that you do, there will be a consent form that explains what you are doing, why you're doing it, what you're hoping to find out, the steps, everything that all the participants will expect to be done. That will be given to the participants and explained. Each participant signs the consent form, saying that they understand it and they agree to it, and you must adhere to that consent form. It's basically a legal binding contract between you and the participants. 6 is acknowledge any collaboration or assistance. If anyone helps you in your research, you must acknowledge that within your research. And 7, you must disclose all sources of financial support. So if any organization, group, or individual gives you money to conduct that research, then within that research, that must be mentioned. It must say that company A contributed X amount of money. So therefore, this makes certain that people aren't buying your results. So for example, let's say if I'm being paid by the the American Baseball League to look at how many athletes use steroids, and the American Baseball League is giving me a large amount of money, but what it could be is that I'm finding that there is a huge use of steroids, but because they gave me a large amount of money, I might sway those conclusions so it looks like they're not using. Okay, so if anyone gives you even a penny, it has to be listed. Now, these again are the code of ethics that all sociologists are required to follow when they are doing research.